I'm Tony Bromley. I'm responsible for the chairing of the organising committee.
So much good postgraduate research work goes on at the university, and sometimes it's sort of under the radar a little bit. So this is our annual opportunity to celebrate what people do, get it out there and show how much we value postgraduate researchers, and also demonstrate to the wider research community and hopefully how the postgraduate researchers contribute to what we do. Well, Postgraduate Researcher of the Year competition is where we do really celebrate specific impact and great research from people at the university. So it's each faculty puts forward who they feel has done the most in terms of impact on the research side of things in their faculty. And we have a competition of 9 faculty nominees then. So in a sense each one has, it sounds a little bit of a cliche, but each one has won already because they've been nominated by their faculty. The 3-minute thesis is it's an opportunity for researchers to come along and do 3 minutes on what their thesis is about, and the discipline is trying to convert one of these big projects with lots of exciting things into a small, succinct snippet. It's that challenge of the broad topic to the succinct, winning sort of 3-minute presentation.
It's been tricky getting a whole thesis into 3 minutes, but it's been a good experience. So.
It was stressful being a new PhD student because you think I've not done my research yet, but at the same time, because so many people were asking me what it was I was doing, I thought it was good to practice and actually have an answer in 3 minutes, so I enjoyed it today. Yeah.
I met a lot of interesting people and listened to a lot of interesting talks, so I would say it's a really fantastic experience.
The 3-minute thesis actually prepares you in a lot of ways. For instance, you have to be clear about your aims and objectives in a very succinct manner.
Hopefully build on the confidence that you can speak to a large number of people, and as well a different type of audience, because obviously it was intelligent but it was non-specialist, so that made you think a lot about not just what to say, not just how to say things, but what to say, how to choose your words carefully.
How to explain your research to people in other, or they know little about your research. How to use plain but clear language. That's the most important part.
Every time we've had a heat or a little session, it's polished everything up a little bit, and we've helped improve.
My skill in presenting things has improved a lot during the previous sessions they organised, so I'm very grateful for that.
The heats worked a lot with nervousness and preparing us for presentations.
The fact that the union was involved was nice, because often I think many students find the union just about entertainment and they find it about kind of fun things and almost non-academic. So the fact that the union was involved in itself and what we're actually here to do, which is study.
It's research from across the university, all different faculties, all different subjects, and you can just tell how people are really, really interested in their own research and really want to get it out there and get other people interested in it.
I didn't expect I can win the first place, but I have done some preparation too, and I do thank all the organizers, Hazel, Claire. Yeah, they do help me a lot about how to improve in my 3 minutes presentation. I do appreciate that.
Many of you may have heard the 400-year-old maxim, an Englishman's home is his castle. And I should think that all of you see home as a place to go to be safe, somewhere where you can lock out the world. And if only that were so. It may surprise you to learn that there are over 2,000 powers of entry under search warrant on the statute book in this country. That is 2,000 instances in which an official can go before a magistrate and gain written authority to enter the privacy of your home without you being consulted. My research looks at a small proportion of those powers, examining the use of search warrants as an investigative tool in day-to-day policing. The aim of the research is to understand how magistrates make sense and come to a decision whether or not to authorise that search warrant. And there's the rub. The magistrates are local lay people with a minimum of legal training, who come to the role with their unique social and economic backgrounds, values, beliefs and idiosyncrasies. The intended impact of the research is to ensure that the judicial safeguard function carried out by the magistrates remains just that, a safeguard. A safeguard of your right to privacy in your own home, and not simply some form of local lottery. Now this might seem all very remote and abstract. Sounds like we're talking about some television show with cops smashing somebody's door down in a town nearby. But when I said earlier, officials, within that category I included utility companies and other non-governmental organisations. For they too can apply for search warrants, often with the power to use force to gain entry, simply on the suspicion that you have no TV licence, that you've copied DVDs or CDs in your home, or you've been horrid to your cat. So in the words of the National Lottery, next time it could be you.
25th of July 1978, the world's first test tube baby, Louise Brown, was born. Many of you here will have heard of the term test tube baby. This refers to a baby who's been conceived through in vitro fertilisation, or IVF. In IVF, the patient's eggs are taken from her ovaries, fertilised in a petri dish, and then the resulting embryos are returned to her womb, and hopefully a pregnancy will ensue. The successful conception and birth of Louise Brown launched IVF as a standard clinical treatment for infertility, offering hope to millions of couples who were unable to conceive naturally. Infertility is a surprisingly prevalent problem. It affects 1 in every 7 couples. And as a result, IVF is incredibly popular, and so far 5 million babies have been born through IVF worldwide. However, there is a major problem with IVF. The success rates are incredibly low. There is just a 1 in 4 chance of having a baby through one treatment of IVF. Now, patients undergo an immense amount of emotional turmoil through their treatment. Many will have been trying for several years to have a baby. Louise Brown's parents, for example, had been trying for 9 years to have a baby before they had IVF. These patients desperately want to have their baby. The procedures that the women have to go through to get their eggs are incredibly invasive, and treatment costs patients thousands of pounds, and often more than 1 treatment is required. On top of that, the cost of IVF to the NHS annually is astronomical. So, taking all of that into account, I'm sure every one of you here will agree with me that a success rate of 1 in 4 is unacceptable. So therefore, a major goal in IVF research currently is to find a way of predicting which eggs are the most likely to give rise to a pregnancy, so that these eggs can be the ones that are fertilised and returned to the womb. And that's exactly what I've been trying to do in my project. I've been analysing the fluid that sits around the egg cells in the ovaries to see if it contains any clues about the quality of the eggs. I found that the fluid around eggs that result in a pregnancy following in vitro fertilisation contain higher levels of certain small molecules than the fluid around eggs that do not result in a pregnancy. Therefore, it may be possible to use these molecules as biomarkers to identify which are the best eggs for fertilisation. So these are really exciting, very promising results, and they have the potential to give IVF patients a better chance of having a baby, thus making the emotional and financial investments they make in IVF more worthwhile. Thank you for listening.
Let's start with a joke, shall we? Factory worker. He's suspected of stealing. So, every day they stop him at the gate. They check his wheelbarrow, they check his pockets. Nothing in the wheelbarrow, nothing in his pockets. Puzzled, they have to let him go. This goes on for years. Eventually he retires and they say to him, "So you're done now. What were you stealing all those years?" He smiles and turns to them and says, "Wheelbarrows." You could say that my PhD is all about noticing the wheelbarrows that these 3 writers have been stealing over the years. But you could also say that it's about the way that they've noticed wheelbarrows being stolen over the years. But what's this whole thing about wheelbarrows? How does it relate to cynics? How does it relate to you or I? Well, wheelbarrows are kind of like your assumptions about everyday life. It's the stuff you take for granted, the stuff that you don't see, not because it isn't there, not because it's hidden away, but because it's in plain sight, so obvious you don't even notice it. Cynics are the people who notice wheelbarrows. But this is where it gets interesting. Because they're two different types of cynics. You've got your cynics who don't care. They're apathetic. And you've got your cynics who do care, who are all about care, who are engaged, the wheelbarrows getting stolen. What does this mean? Well, political terms, I suppose, it's like not voting for a police commissioner. But critically, it's not voting. It's about spoiling your ballot. It's about showing that there's a problem in the system as such. What I'm interested in these three writers is how they're focused on forms of tyranny in the 20th century. How they, in response to apartheid, the Holocaust, fascism, need to find a way of saying no to the system as such. They use their humor. This is their wheelbarrow. They use their humor to what? To test people's assumptions. To make their audiences think about where they are in everyday life. And perhaps they teach us a bit of how to use humor to steal a couple of wheelbarrows. Thank you very much.
Are you hungry? If you're hungry simply because you've had an early lunch, then you should consider yourself lucky. 1 in 7 people is permanently hungry because they can't access enough food. Their jobs in Africa, interest in them rapidly dwindled and adoption rates stagnated. So how do we convince decision makers that there needs to be a renewed shift in investments in rainwater harvesting as an adaptation strategy to climate change? The first step of my research has been to go talk to farmers in West Africa, where this boy lives, and where these technologies have been used successfully for several decades already. They provided me with some insight into what makes them use these technologies. Their number one answer was, we have no choice. If we don't use the technologies, we get no yields. Our soils are poor and rainfall has been decreasing over the years. This prompted me to have a closer look at climate data. I investigated the potential yield increases that would occur if we could provide the crops with the extra water they needed through rainwater harvesting. I found that crops such as maize could see increases of up to 100% now and in the future. While this can help us show the importance of rainwater harvesting to decision makers, something else in the climate data caught my attention. The farmers were telling me they were seeing a decrease in rainfall, but the data was telling a different story. While a perceived decrease in rainfall was driving the adoption of the technologies, reality was there was an increase in rainfall. I was missing something, and that is soil erosion. In the next step of my research, I'll be looking at how other changing environmental factors, such as soil erosion, can affect the perception of climate change and drive the adoption of the technologies. Even though we know that using rainwater harvesting can be the difference between enough yields to feed a family and no yields at all, resulting in starvation, we need to understand the underlying social and environmental conditions that lead to the adoption of these technologies, so that in the future, interest in them doesn't fade away.
Many governments and companies around the world trying to cut costs have been subjecting more and more professionals to the joys of online learning. For example, in healthcare, the World Health Organization has more than 300 online communities for more than 10,000 professionals around the world to connect, learn, and share with one another. This is a wonderful vision. But more and more, online learners and teachers today face a big problem. Sociologists are finding out that professionals feel very frustrated when a new idea they learn cannot be applied directly because a manager or a boss says to them, "I'm sorry, no, that's not the way we do things around here." In addition, researchers were finding out that despite billions invested, the impact of online learning on improving practice was very low. To find a solution to this problem, I created a new structure for online learning called reflexive networking. First of all, I designed a smarter learning lounge for a group of doctors from England and Scotland. Over 2 months, they met regularly in the lounge with a tutor to share problems, discuss issues, and give opinions and advice to one another. To measure the value of this process, I asked them to rate from 1 to 5 all the different benefits they got before and after the online learning. I then took the average of the score and I found out that overall their practice improved by 13.4%. This was the first time that this group of professionals could see and know exactly how much the online learning could improve impact on their practice. Imagine if we use this smarter learning model for more professionals such as teachers, engineers, social workers, and accountants. What the doctors said was that the benefit they got, most of it was continuous access to a flexible learning environment in parallel to their daily practice. What they liked most was constant feedback which they could apply directly into their work and then bring the results back into the lounge, thus creating a virtuous spiral. In this way, learning becomes not just something that's distant from their daily lives, but learning becomes about ourselves, by ourselves, and for ourselves. Next time you are sitting at a Facebook, iPhone, or laptop trying to learn something and feeling incredibly frustrated, nothing seems to change around here, take a minute to ask yourself, am I actually getting smarter? Are all these technologies using me or am I using them? At a time where there's a greater risk of education and the internet being used by big business, this research shows that the time is now right for us to seize the opportunity to make learning smarter for improving impact, greater democratization, and personal empowerment. Thank you.
Asbestos is a material that was used in the late 1800s as a building insulator. However, in the early 1900s, it was found to be extremely toxic to humans, causing a form of lung cancer called mesothelioma. As a result of asbestos exposure, thousands of people have lost their lives, and this is because we were using a material that we did not yet fully understand. Now, what if I were to tell you that currently being produced all over the world for implementation in commercial products and applications are a set of materials that many scientists have predicted could cause similar adverse health effects to that of asbestos? I'm talking about nanoparticles. So firstly, where might you find these nanoparticles? Well, they have a huge amount of amazing applications across a wide range of different industries. One example of which is in healthcare. Nanoparticles are actually being used to treat cancer. So as I'm sure we're all aware, chemotherapy can be an extremely grueling process. Patients will often lose all their hair and they can become extremely unwell as a result of the treatment. Nanoparticles are being used to specifically treat malignant cells, and they do this without actually affecting the surrounding tissue, thus alleviating many of the horrible side effects of chemotherapy. Now this is just one application, but there are hundreds and more. So what exactly is a nanoparticle, and why do they have these amazing potential applications? Well, a nanometer is a billionth of a meter. Or to put that into terms that you or I can relate to, the human hair is approximately 80,000 nanometers wide. Now, nanomaterials are materials, but with nano dimensions. They can be gold, silver, any material you can think of, but they have nano dimensions. Now, their small size is actually what gives them these amazing properties, because they behave completely differently to their bulk counterparts. And this is due to a huge increase in the number of atoms that sit on the surface of the material. Now these atoms are extremely unsatisfied because they're not surrounded by other atoms like in the rest of the material. And this results in a huge increase in the amount of energy which gives nanoparticles these properties. Now, although the small size is what makes them extremely beneficial, it's also a cause for great concern. Many scientists believe that nanoparticles may actually be able to transport into cells within our bodies and cause diseases such as cancer. So could the particles fighting the cancer actually be causing cancer elsewhere? My research is investigating the potential toxicity of nanomaterials. Ultimately, I hope to compose protocols and regulations so that nanoparticle use can be regulated for commercial applications. This will hopefully protect workers and consumers such as you and I.
Let me start by telling you a story about an 82-year-old lady in Doncaster, South Yorkshire. She suffers from long-term condition which affects her lung, making breathing difficult. Her community nurse identified her as potentially likely to benefit from new technology that was being introduced in the area. What this technology does is enable this lady in the comfort of her home to be able to measure her blood pressure, her level of oxygen in the blood using this small device, and small tailored questions that are relevant to her condition. Having used this technology for over a year, this lady found that it was very beneficial to her in terms of enabling her gain confidence in managing her condition. She was quite satisfied with the way how the technology has enabled her to adapt in terms of managing her day-to-day living condition. Why this is important? This lady represents 1 in 17 million people in Britain today who live with long-term conditions. And the problem is getting worse as more and more people live longer. There is also another problem. Delivering healthcare services is an expensive business. It costs a lot to healthcare services. It is predicted that if we are to enable people to be able to be engaged in partnership with their health professionals to be able to manage their condition, they need to be able to use this kind of technology to manage their condition. The other problem is access to health services. Despite us having more healthcare professionals than other counterparts in other parts of the world, we still have difficulty of accessing health services for a number of people with long-term conditions. Therefore, this technology offers an opportunity to enable millions of people out there who need to manage their condition so that they can be able to not only reduce costs to the health services, but improve the quality of life. A number of countries, including England, have tried to use this technology, embedding it into health services. Some succeeded, but others have failed. My research is to try to understand why some of this new technology embed in routine health services while others don't. This understanding is critical if we are to enable more and more people benefit from this technology, help improve their quality of life, reduce costs of delivering health services, and potentially save lives. Thank you.
Faraway countries of which we know little were the words of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in 1938 as he outlined his opposition to the use of force by Britain during the Czech crisis with Nazi Germany. Nowadays, the foreign policy problem facing Western governments is a rather different one. Instead, it is a question of when and to what ends it is justified to intervene in the affairs of another country. Now, Czechoslovakia was and remains only 700 miles away, but today we live in a world where it seems there are no faraway countries of which we know little. Instead, we see a world of humanitarian crises, rogue states, and civil wars. And these are the opportunities and the threats that the international community sees around it, and often it's a cause of a lot of despair, both within and about the international community. Since March of 2011, some 40,000 people have been killed in the violence which has engulfed Syria. 40,000 is greater than the population of this university, and that number has increased by 4,000 since I last spoke in the heat of this competition. My interest is in the nature and the extent of the international community. Who does it include, and what do they agree, and how could they handle crises like that in Syria? Sometimes they're perceived as an opportunity to act, to show our resolve, and to promote the international community through human rights, democratic governance, and free markets. The threat is perceived as a threat of inaction, that never again we will have been heard to say, never again, that refrain often repeated, that we will demonstrate our lack of cohesion, and we will demonstrate our failure to act. My research questions that premise and analyses what the threat is posed by acting, the threat posed by Western powers proclaiming their values as universal truths, crusading as a vanguard, if you will, despite the absence of a global consensus around the values they are looking to promote. The consequences of this? Perhaps you could fracture the West itself, as was seen in the deserts of Iraq in 2003. There could be a backlash from the likes of Russia and China, which can see the Security Council just now over the issue of Syria. And we could alienate emerging non-Western great powers who resent what they perceive to be Western hubris, trying to direct what is, after all, supposed to be an international community. I will examine what Britain should aim for when it intervenes in such crises beyond the immediate crisis itself. and how this affects the sustainability of the international community. A sustainable international community is one that couples both order with justice, that recognises the need not just for stability, but yes for flexibility, that sees a place for leadership, but recognises as well that this needs to be built on a form of consensus, and how should Britain engage with that ideal. Now that is a difficult prospect to aim for, I'm sure we can all agree, particularly when one considers just how fragile the international community is, not unlike the glass globe behind me. Thank you.
Question 1, who are you? Question 2, what are you doing here? Now question 1 can be answered pretty simply, based on age, gender, nationality, simple, basic demographic questions. Question number 2, however, is a lot more complex. Now, for me personally, in order to answer this question, do you mean, why did I choose to come to Leeds from the United States? What course am I studying? Or what activities am I involved in here in Leeds? Now, personally, as a PhD student in the School of Education, I can say I'm involved in many activities within the school, within the faculty, within the Students' Union, and obviously I love to travel. But there's a lot of other issues, because guess what? I'm only one of over 7,000 international students here at the University of Leeds. In 2011, there were actually 3.5 million students worldwide who were studying outside of their country of national origin. So, my research is trying to look at the relationships between motivation, engagement, and experience quality for international students. Now, this is important because the student experience affects not just the student, but also the university and even wider society as students talk about their experiences once they return home. So, again, I'm trying to look at the international student experience from a holistic standpoint because there are a lot of situations where students can learn and develop outside the classroom as you socialize and engage in daily life. Now, this might seem a bit odd, but international students have a different way of engaging with the world. Imagine seeing new sights and sounds every single day. Not quite sure whether the building you found is a supermarket or a museum. Trust me, it can happen. But international students also can find many different benefits from engaging in different ways. Research has shown that those students who are engaged in university activities and societies actually tend to have more British friends and more connections with the local culture. International students are also engaged in other ways, whether it be in their living communities, their social groups, or with their departments, can also have lower anxiety levels and difficulties with adjusting, also known as culture shock. Now, my research is obviously focused on the international student experience. And I've personally found that my experience has been enriched by these kind of experiences. But again, I'm only one of over 7,000 international students here at Leeds, so I'm interested more in the experiences of others. So hopefully I've answered a couple questions, because that's who I am and that's what I'm doing here. Thank you.
So I'd like to start off with a quote that I think summarises my research really well. It's from Alice in Wonderland, and it goes, "It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards." Now, in contrast to memory, which has been intensely studied for around the last 100 years, the research into the ability of humans to imagine plausible future events that could happen in their lifetimes has only really existed in the last 5. Now, I'd like to talk about my contribution to this field. So, in my PhD, I was curious whether there are any similarities between past and future events. And in one study, I found that those people who remembered events with a lot more vivid detail concerning objects, people, and the place of that event imagine the future with a lot more detail as well. In another study, I found that where you see subtle memory problems in old age, similar problems also exist in the ability to imagine. And that study raised an interesting point, actually, because we often think older adults should sort of reminisce about the past. And my research found that future events are more positive. So maybe we can start thinking about imagining the future as a way to sort of improve old age. So, I mean, that's healthy ageing, but much more dramatically, in cases of amnesia or severe memory loss, you see an almost complete breakdown in this ability to imagine. And in my PhD, I studied a patient, let's call him John, who had, after suffering several strokes, had amnesia. Now, could he imagine the future? Generally, no, he couldn't. But where he could, it told me that he couldn't use his past to effectively plan for the future. So this was evidence when he said that he'd be moving into a third-storey flat, even though his recent disability meant he was no longer able to climb the stairs to access that flat. So all of these results that I've talked about can be summarised in one system, which allows you to mentally travel backwards and forwards in time. And this raises fundamental questions about the way we see memory. So why do we remember? And does memory exist so that we can plan and think about the future? So, going back to the quote, it's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards. If I was to change that based on my research that I just talked about, I might say the best sort of memory is focused on the future.
I hope you enjoyed the Olympics this time. Well, I did, until the news came out that Paula Radcliffe won't be running the marathon because of her osteoarthritis condition. If you don't already know, osteoarthritis is a disease that affects the joint. It can be really painful and cause immobility. Mainly because of osteoarthritis, more than 80,000 hip replacement surgeries were performed in the UK alone last year. Unfortunately, more than 8,000 of these artificial joints fail in patients every year. This causes more pain and suffering to patients and puts a huge burden on the NHS due to the high cost and complexity of these revision surgeries. So what do I do and what does my research involve? I develop methods to test these artificial joints before they actually make it to patients. You might already have heard on the news quite recently about the failure of some of these artificial joints. And the reports on the news have claimed that these artificial joints that fail haven't been tested. On the contrary, these artificial joints that fail have been tested quite thoroughly, and they met current international standards before they were made available to patients. So what went wrong? Well, to meet international standards, one will have to assemble these components, these artificial joints, perfectly aligned in a machine and test them under a standard walking condition. Well, we don't just walk all day, we do all sorts of activities. We go up and down the stairs, we sit down, we rise from a chair, we squat, we jog. Paula Radcliffe runs marathons. Another thing that this international standard assumes that surgeons implant these artificial joints perfectly aligned in patients. Well, there's a lot of evidence that these artificial joints are not perfectly positioned in a high percentage of patients. So what I've been doing during my PhD is assemble these components deliberately in the wrong position and test them and see how they perform. One of the interesting findings from my research is if we have tested these artificial joints that failed in patients under these advanced methods, the orthopedic company wouldn't have made these products available to patients in the first place. So the aim of my research is to help develop safer and reliable artificial joints that benefit patients with joint problems and hopefully athletes like Paula Radcliffe and give them the healthy and active life that they deserve for the rest of their lives. Thank you.
The north of China has been in dire water shortage. In Beijing, the water resources per capita is only 1.5% of the world average. But on the other hand, the south of China has been hit by devastating floods almost every day. To solve this problem, China has launched its unprecedented south to north water transfer project, which is composed of the western, the central, and the eastern routes. Among the three routes, the central route has been given the highest expectation. Just using gravity, it can transfer 14 billion cubic meters of water each year from a radical named Danjiangkou to northern cities like Beijing along the canal over 1,200 kilometers, which is about 4 times the distance from Leeds to London. It will cost £20 billion and will be completed in 2014. However, if the water quality in the Danjiangkou Reservoir cannot keep high. This ambitious project may become a huge waste of transferring polluted water. To prevent this unbearable failure, the Chinese government has required the water source areas around the Danjiangkou Reservoir to restrict the industry and convert some farmlands into forests to reduce the water pollution. To some extent, this is unfair to people in this water source area because they have the same rights to develop the economy just as people in the northern cities like Beijing. They should be compensated for providing the clean water source. But by whom and how much the compensation should be? For answering these questions, my study used questionnaire series and economic models to investigate 1. Residents in northern cities about their willingness to pay for clean water source, and 2. Rural households around Danjiangkou Reservoir about their cost to carry out water protection measures. By synthesizing these two parts, I'm hoping to establish a payment scheme for clean water source. China is not the only country working for water transfer project. People in the US are arguing about transferring water from the North California to the South California. People in the UK are also discussing about water transfer from the North to the Southeast. So my research is promising to provide policy suggestions not only for China, but also other countries facing the conflicts in water transfer project. Thank you very much.
Interest in older prisoners comes from watching reruns of that 1970s British prison sitcom Porridge and its memorable character of Norman Stanley Fletcher, a 43-year-old repeat offender that has previously spent time in prison. Well, why is he important? Well, they didn't know in the 1970s that in the 21st century, the over 40 prison population would be a really prominent group. Over a quarter of our male prison population is now over the age of 40, and it's the fastest growing age group in our prison system. Well, why am I interested in the Norman Stanley Fletchers of the world? Well, I'm looking at how age may affect the movement from prison back into the community, a process known as resettlement. I predict that age may actually affect the needs and concerns of prisoners, that their varied life histories, support networks, experiences and skills will affect what they need. For example, older prisoners may have wives, grown children, their own homes, but they may also have multiple health needs and mobility problems. When they come back into the community, they may face double discrimination. Firstly, because of their status as an ex-offender, and secondly, because of their age. But why is this important? Why does older prisoners' resettlement matter? They are criminals, after all. Well, for me personally, I believe that older prisoners can be very vulnerable, and like all vulnerable people in our society, we need to take care of them. But probably more importantly for you in the audience and the rest of society, successful resettlement can reduce reoffending. Thus, if we successfully resettle older prisoners, we can reduce future victims. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, I forgot to say that we've had qualification rounds, so the 17 key speakers you see today, they've already fought their way through those. I don't think you can have any idea how much work they have put into their presentation today. If you can do it in 3 minutes, you can do any length presentation. So I'm so proud of them. Would you all like to stand up, take a bow and get a round of applause? Please, come on guys, you're embarrassed. Come on.